Green light is on and I'm ready to roll. Hi, how are you? Moving on to front 242 video number two. 242 number two. And now we're getting into some really meaty front 242 releases. Geography is very interesting, and I talked about that 2 or 3 days ago. This next little phase of their career in the mid 80s is interesting. As I mentioned in the last video, Geography I didn't hear until 5 years after the fact. It got released here in the United States in 1987. It was released in Europe in 1982. So I was late to that, and I was young, so it took me a while to get into that. This was this was the next record I heard after Geography. No comment. All of these, I'm going to talk about three releases because I think they're interrelated very closely. All of these releases I'm going to talk about are on Wax Trax. These all have like slightly different covers and artworks and very slightly different to the European releases, but basically the same. Some very minor differences, but these are all the US Wax Trax issues that I'm holding up because I'm an American. I'm in the US. So these are the ones that were available to me at the time. This is No Comment. This is an EP. I think people think of it as an album, but originally its intention was an EP. 6 tracks, about a half an hour long. I had a very intense experience with this record, and I'll explain why. One of the things I love about Front 242 is this imagery that they throw in your face. It's very mysterious and aggressive, and it throws you off a little bit. You don't quite know what you're dealing with, especially when you're younger. When you're a kid like me, when I was listening to these, it was jarring. It was like, whoa, what's going on here? Kind of a spooky cover, if you ask me, but it gets you in the right mindset to hear this music. Track listing, Commando mix. Not even gonna. I'm not even gonna pronounce that one. Deceit, Lovely Day, No Shuffle, Special Forces. I think there's an Apocalypse Now. I swear, there's an Apocalypse Now sample in there. It sure sounds like it. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. More reason to love this. I'll show the label really quickly. Front 242. No comment. Wax Trax label. Some more odd, kind of spooky, off-putting imagery, which I love. I love it when you're presented with these images before you even hear the music, where you're like, okay, what's happening here? That's the perfect approach. That's exactly what you want when you're making a record. You want your listeners to be like, huh? At least I think so, and you definitely get that. And I'm gonna talk about this music, but I'm gonna show the records first because I think these three releases are all very similar in my mind. I think they all have very similar approaches and ideologies and sound to them. This is the Commando remix single for the US market. Look at this cover. That's a very powerful cover. Front 242, their message has always been anti-war and peace. That's always what they've sung about. They sing about injustice, and that's the unique thing about them. And I'm going to get to that. Look at this font. I've always thought this is like a Russian style font. Keep in mind this came out in the mid '80s. Gorbachev was the leader of Russia. It was still Russia then. It was a different time and intense times. The Berlin Wall was still up. Yeah, intense times, especially in Europe and Russia. Here's the label. Don't Crash, Funk Gaddafi, one of the best titled tracks ever. Commando remix, nice, nice 9.5 minute dance cut. Serious funky grooves, some awesome vocals, very attention detailed electronics. Production on these records is fantastic. These guys didn't miss a single beat, figuratively and literally. They were on top of their game. And then this is Endless Riddance. Slightly different artwork and cover to the European release, very slightly. 3 tracks on this. And these all came out within a couple of years of each other in the mid 80s. These are all post geography and pre official version. I think it's important to keep that context. But what I love about Front 242 and what these guys were doing for me, especially back then, is like I just mumbled about their attention to detail musically. You're listening to their music, and every little drum pad, every little synth line, every little idea they have is very carefully placed. It's music of detail, and I love that. Especially when you're dealing with electronic music, it's easy to just plaster down a beat in the bass line and walk away. But they had a hell of a lot more going on than that, both musically and lyrically. And what I love about them lyrically is that they had a very prescient point to make, always, and it was political. And it was rare to hear political messages in electronic dance music. And even more rare where that message was a good one, where it was intense and well delivered. And these guys did that. I always thought the cool thing about these guys is they reminded me of Kraftwerk in some ways, and I obviously I mean that as a immense compliment. I love Kraftwerk. I think most people do. I think of all the groups that have come since Kraftwerk, I think Front 242 is one of the few that has been able to maintain a very high level of musicality with what they release in terms of comparing them to Kraftwerk. Musically, I think they'd have to say they were influenced by Kraftwerk. I mean, everybody is who makes electronic music, whether they know it or not. I think you just are, but very few bands touch upon what Kraftwerk does and did. And in fact, no one really does. But there just are a handful of bands that were able to musically get close to what Kraftwerk were doing, and Front 242 is one of them, and I love them for that. Music of detail, like Kraftwerk. I'd argue that no music is as detailed as Kraftwerk. These guys come close though. But what the big difference between the two, and this is what I love about Front 242, Kraftwerk lyrically would come up with these very generalized universal ideas. So the global populace could relate to them. Like, with Autobahn, everyone can relate to the Autobahn, motorways, freeways, cars, Trans-Europe Express, a train, numbers, computer world, computers. Kraftwerk was brilliant about taking these very generalized concepts and making sure that everybody on the planet could relate to it. That's part of their genius. What Front 242 did is the complete opposite, and what they still do. They focus on very specific ideas, and they pinpoint it, and they force you to listen. This is music not just of detail, but of intelligence. Front 242 presupposes a high level of intelligence in their audience. And that's what I really like about these guys. If you're fully to understand what this band does, I think you really have to dig into these tracks and hear what they're saying. You don't necessarily have to. You could go to the club and listen to this and dance to it all night and be totally happy. But you can equally go home and lay down and put your headphones on and listen to the message that they're imparting and get a whole different experience out of it. That's something Front 242 does that Kraftwerk has never done. They're very political, and in that way, Front 242 is a very punk style band. Their music's very electronic. It has all kinds of sources going back to the 70s that all are housed in electronics, and they do it very skillfully. But lyrically, yeah, it demands your attention. Where Kraftwerk is going to let you off the hook and think of these generalized universal ideas, Front 242, they're not interested in that. You need to pay attention to this music if you want to understand it lyrically. It does demand your undivided attention if you're going to get all you can out of it. And I don't know if that was a conscious choice of theirs, but I think it was a brilliant choice if it was to take the to take what what Kraftwerk had built in a vast frontier of electronic music to do what the kind of stuff Kraftwerk did, but then go the other way lyrically and kind of take a more DIY punk approach to it. I thought it was brilliant. I still think, and that's what's so fun about these records because you have those options. I love music that gives you options. If you need music that just energizes you, this is great stuff to listen to. You don't necessarily even have to listen to the lyrics. But then the lyrics creep up on you, maybe years later, like they did with me. When I first heard this when I was a kid, I was like, yeah, this shit's groovy. Awesome stuff. But as I got older and started understanding the world around me, I started actually listening to the lyrics, and it was like, ooh. So then it takes on a whole new dimension, this music. And that's what these three records represent for me. And look at that logo. I mean, come on, that's a powerful logo. And very much the same way that Kraftwerk, and this is another Kraftwerk comparison. I hope you're not offended by that because I love Kraftwerk. There's nothing, there's no shame in this. But just like Kraftwerk took that idea of numbers and translated it globally, look at this. Very similar. This is a logo that will translate to any language. And that's something that Front 242 has always done masterfully. I think this batch of records is really fantastic, man. It hasn't aged a day. I just listened to these recently and I was like, God, these still sound good. Front 242 was onto something. These records are pretty much 40 years old now. And that's always a fun context for me too, to remember, put into context when these records were released and how ahead of their time they were. And then, especially in these times we're in today, it's really tough to hear anybody singing about any political issues that are interesting. These guys did. There's always been all kinds of turmoil and craziness happening at any point in history politically. So it was no more or less intense than at this time than it is at this time. And when I say this time, I mean that time in the mid 80s. There's always turmoil going on in this world. That's the human condition. We're always at war somewhere with somebody and on some level. Front 242 does a very good job articulating that, both musically and lyrically. And yeah, it's fun. Like every time I listen to these guys, I can't help but think of Kraftwerk. They're spiritual brethren. I've always thought that Front 242 and Kraftwerk are soul brothers, you know? I don't compare bands to Kraftwerk lightly, man. I love Kraftwerk. I think, they're every bit the gods that everybody say they are. Maybe 4 or 5 bands I would compare to Kraftwerk. I think this is one of the best bands that took what Kraftwerk had built and then rebuilt their own career into taking a nugget of an idea that Kraftwerk gave them. Excellent, awesome stuff, man. This in particular, of these 3 releases, this one would be my favorite. No comment. This one's the most varied. These other ones are 12 inches. Not that they're anything less than this. It's just they're brief. They're more brief affairs. This isn't quite a full album, but there's just a lot more stuff going on here. There's a lot more to take in. And that's my Front 242 Part 2. This is just my opinion and my theory on this great group. I think take they take Kraftwerk's lead and they do something new with it. They're not interested in letting you walk away without getting their message, because there's a very important message for them to impart to their audience, and they do it here. And you can take it or you can leave it, but they make their message very clear and very fun to listen to. Good stuff. Until the next Front 242 video, which will be coming soon, I promise you. Thanks again. Bye.